Well, a little bit about myself. As you know, my name is Arlene, and I'm the facilitator for Transgender Life Support, a support group for trans people. We meet every Tuesday from 7 to 9 p.m. at Affirmations Community Center up in the boardroom. I've been facilitating that group now for about 3+ years. I'm a former board of directors member at Affirmations and was secretary, as a matter of fact, so I know how much work that is. I was also vice president of PFLAG Downriver. I didn't start my transition until 2007. I was almost 57 years old. I've known all my life who I was, and it was a struggle. I was married, I had children, and at this point they were adults. I had grandchildren. I had my own business. It was a steel company. And I was just at the point in my life where I just couldn't go on. I had battled dysphoria my whole life. I tried to suppress it, and I knew it just wasn't going to go away. And I thought to myself, I don't want to die unhappy, so I had to do something. And I got up the courage to tell my spouse, Annie. And incidentally, we're still married, and in August it'll be 43 years. She's so amazing. My children are amazing. My grandchildren are wonderful. So I thought about transition probably beginning September of 2007. I started seeing a therapist in November of 2007. I started seeing a doctor and began my contra-hormone therapy on June 13th, 2008. I decided that I was going to go full-time September 1st of that year. The following September, I had a surgical consultation with Dr. Christine McGinn in the Philadelphia area, and on October 11th, 2010, it's easy to remember, 01-1110, I had my gender-confirming surgery. And 1 month after that, my youngest grandson, Gabriel, was born. So I'm only 1 month older than my youngest grandson. And just a note that my family has been absolutely wonderful. My transition has been amazing. I had a really good life as a male, presenting as a male. You know, we did a lot. I was successful in business. I had a lot of guy buddies. And since my transition, my life has been amazing. It all seems like a dream. So, you know, I've had a wonderful experience, and so I want to share that with the rest of the people in my community that haven't been able to experience those things. So, let me start out on a positive note. Being trans is not synonymous with self-hatred. It needs to be synonymous with self-love and self-care. Trans people love themselves so much that they do whatever it takes to be themselves. We love ourselves so much that we sometimes risk life and limb to simply exist. Our transitions are necessity, done out of love for self and our love for life. We need to let those of us know who are stumbling and struggling that we are worth all the world has to offer everyone else. We are worthy of acceptance. We are worthy of existing in this world. Our stories matter. Loving us is not some burden. Our transitions are not due to self-hatred. We're not restricted to pain, suffering, and a life of being pitied. We deserve basic human respect and dignity because we're human. Transgender people just want to be acknowledged as existing. We don't want to force anything on anyone. We just want people to actually see us, not the person they insist on seeing. Our issues are transgender issues. We don't want to have people mistaking our issues as being about sex. It isn't about our sex life. It's about our gender and how we want to be perceived by others. It's about our whole life and our happiness. And that's our issue. Sex is not integral to us. We don't want sex to be part of the transgender discussion. Sex is basically a 30-minute amusement. We'd rather focus the other 23 hours and 30 minutes on making ourselves more comfortable and physically. Comfortable mentally and physically. Our gender identity is how we see ourselves. Some of us see ourselves as women. Some of us see ourselves as men. Some as a combination of both. Some as neither. Some of us have complex identities that may be fluid and change over time. For instance, some of ourselves see ourselves as female and male to male. I'm going to start over again.
All right.
Some of us see ourselves as female to male trans people and also identify as butch women and gender queer. Everyone has a gender identity, and everyone expresses their gender identity. We all make choices about how to cut our hair, how not to cut our hair, the hair on our legs, what clothes to wear, whether or not what type of makeup to wear, what body parts to accentuate or not, and so on. We all make hundreds of conscious decisions every day about how we're going to express our gender. We all have a gender. I'll talk about transgender people very broadly conceived. Those of us whose gender identity and expression that does not or is not perceived to match the stereotypical gender norms associated with our assigned gender at birth. In other words, people think that we should be more masculine, more feminine, not have facial hair, not have wombs, identify differently, and so on. And a note on the word transgender. Some of us who fit the above definition do self-identify as transgender, and some of us don't. We are a community with an evolving language. What is key is that everyone has the right to self-identify, and I'm going to say that over and over again throughout this presentation. When in doubt about how a person identifies or what pronouns a person prefers, ask nicely and politely. It's very important to respect each person's self-identification. For instance, it's not respectful to challenge one's gender identity. There's great diversity within the transgender communities. Transgender people span all communities, are of all backgrounds, ethnicities, ages, and abilities. Transgender people have all sexual orientations. Gender identity is about who one is. Sexual orientation is about who one is attracted to. Some transgender people are straight, some are gay, some are bi, and some are queer. Transgender people have an enormous and beautiful gender diversity. Among transgender as among non-transgender people, there are feminine women, masculine women, androgynous women, feminine men, masculine men, androgynous men. There are infinitely different ways to be female, and infinitely different ways to be male. And there are infinitely ways to be neither. One term to describe those who do identify as completely male or female is genderqueer. But not all people who do not identify as male and female identify as genderqueer. And those who do, identify, and some people who do identify as male and female, do identify as genderqueer. So again, it's important to respect everyone's self-identification. A lot of information here. There are options other than female and male. There are transgender people who identify as trans, transsexual, transgender, third gender, fourth gender, no gender, bi-spirit, trans men, trans women, just to name a few. Some of us see ourselves as combining aspects of male and female. Some of us see ourselves as falling between male and female. Some of us fall completely outside of the binary gender system. Some of us have the same gender always and everywhere. Some of us are fluid, and some of us change situationally or over time. And a little note on spectrum and lines. There are women and there are men. These are just two options among a million. Female and male are not two endpoints on a line. There is no line. There's no spectrum. Gender is much bigger than a line. We cannot order people on a scale of masculinity, femininity. Gender is at least a three-dimensional space that allows motion. I guess one way to picture it is a gender galaxy with an infinite number of gender points that can move and that are not hierarchically ordered. Bodies, we're going to talk about bodies. In addition to the enormous variety of identifications, there's an equally impressive variety of bodies. We all have bodies. We all alter our bodies in some way. Some women have wombs, some do not. Some men have facial hair, some do not. Some male to female transgender people identify as 100% female and never take hormones or have surgeries. Transgender women define for themselves what it means to be female and to have a female body. Some female to male transgender people take male hormones and have mastectomies and yet do not identify as men. Some do. Some mix and match to best express their own fabulous gender. Some take hormones but have no surgery or vice versa. Some take low doses of hormones or go on and off. For some trans people, altering genitalia is not important. For others, it is. Some transsexual men identify as 100% male and choose to become pregnant and bear and raise children. There's no prototypical transgender experience. There's an endless variety of transgender bodies, an endless variety of transgender identities, and an endless combination of the two. It is not necessarily those who take low doses of hormones who identify between male and female. It is not necessarily those who take hormones who identify as transsexual. And it's not necessarily those who have genital surgery who identify as 100% male or 100% female. Further, there are endless ways to arrive at being transgender and of being transgender. Some transgender people are assigned female at birth. They know from day one they are male. They describe their experience as being a man trapped in a woman's body, and they live their lives as a heterosexual man. This narrative is perpetuated, reinforced, and rewarded by the medical and psychological establishment. In fact, we had a new attendee at last night's meeting that fits that description exactly. Many transgender people share only part of this, or no part of the narrative. Many transgender people live happy lives prior to transition. Not all transgender people feel uncomfortable in their bodies, and they want to alter their bodies. Not all transgender people have the same identification throughout their lives. Endless narratives exist. And another quick note on sex versus gender. In our society, sex is usually seen as the more objective, natural backdrop to a more socially constructed gender. In the transgender communities, there are many different views about sex and gender, their definition and their interrelation. Some transgender people see themselves as having one sex and a different gender. Some transgender people don't see themselves in this way. I don't want to offer a definition here, but I do want to remind us that both sex and gender are socially constructed, and both sex and gender are socially real. And the bottom line, there are many, many different ways to be in this world. There are many, many different ways to be transgender or gender nonconforming in this world. And in the end, what counts as a person's self-identification. You've all read the Justice at Every Turn study, right? So I'm going to give you a quiz. No. That study brings to light what is both patently obvious and far too often dismissed from the human rights agenda. Transgender and gender nonconforming people face injustice at every turn. In childhood homes, in school systems that promise to educate and nurture and shelter, in harsh and exclusionary workplaces, at the grocery store, the hotel front desk, in doctor's offices and emergency rooms, before judges and at the hands of landlords, police officers, healthcare workers, and other service providers. The National Gay and Lesbian Task Force and the National Center for Transgender Equality surveyed over 6,400 transgender and gender nonconforming participants who took the time and energy to answer questions about the depth and breadth of injustice in their lives. A diverse set of people from all 50 states, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the U.S. Virgin Islands completed online paper surveys. This study created the first 360-degree picture of discrimination against transgender and gender nonconforming people in the U.S. and provides critical data points for policymakers, community activists, legal advocates to confront the appalling realities documented and press the case for equity and justice. Even more startling, Black and African American transgender women have 50% greater homicide rates than their white, Latina, Native American counterparts and were more than 3 times as likely to experience police violence, more than any other group. According to the 2012 report by the National Coalition of Anti-Violence Programs on LGBTQ and HI-affected hate violence. Results from the National Transgender Discrimination Survey show that Black transgender women are disproportionately discriminated against and overrepresented across multiple disparities, including poverty. 34% earn less than $10,000 annually. That's twice the rate of transgender people of other races. Housing, 41% experience homelessness in their lives, and 38% have been refused housing because of bias. Employment, 26% unemployment rate, and 32% job loss due to bias. And HIV positive status, 20%. Medical care, 21% have been refused medical care due to bias. And half the respondents said they had to resort to sex work and distribution of illegal substances in order to survive. Global Action for Trans Equality and American Jewish World Service recently released the results of the first ever survey of transgender and intersex groups around the world in a new report, The State of Trans and Intersex Organizing. The report was presented on January 28th during the International Human Rights Funders Group's 2014 San Francisco conference. So this just happened. The survey of 340 organizations documents the deep discrimination and multiple challenges facing trans and intersex people, and the organizing that they are leading worldwide to win their human rights. It also shows the significant funding shortfall facing trans and intersex groups, and the challenges and obstacles they face in obtaining resources to carry out their work. While funding of lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and intersex groups has grown in the past 10 years, the survey results show clearly that not enough funding has reached the trans and intersex-led initiatives to address their priority issues. A lot of the time, LGBT activists think, bring too much attention to the word transgender and people will look away. Sometimes they drop gender identity from non-discrimination bills entirely. Only 17 states and the District of Columbia provide employment and housing protections based on gender identity and expression. A federal law designed to create those protections has been held up in Congress for decades, specifically because it includes trans people. In Maryland, a relatively progressive state, 2013 saw the arrival of marriage equality and a legislature with several out gay and lesbian delegates. That same legislature voted down a trans anti-discrimination bill. There are multiple factors. It has to do with money, education, and transphobia within the community. Although 90% of Fortune 500 companies have policies prohibiting discrimination based on sexual orientation, only 57% have policies prohibiting discrimination based on gender identity. So it's a majority, but it's a striking difference between gender identity and sexual orientation. One of the most significant issues preventing transgender legislative victories is the absence of the kind of engagement that is necessary for them to happen because of a lack of transgender people in the organization's leadership. We need to focus on bringing our communities together. When you have two different oppressed groups, one group often pushes down the other so they're at least higher up on the totem pole. Trying to find transgender leaders would require an organization to show they're trying to attract trans supporters. And it would take recruiting within that community to find qualified transgender people. But let me tell you, there's plenty of qualified transgender people. There are polls showing that Americans largely support legislation offering transgender people protection against discrimination in housing at work. If people are concerned about this legislation, they don't understand the political dynamics in this country. Taking a national look, a poll found that 73% of voters supported protecting LGBT people from workplace discrimination. So you can reference handout number 1 for those figures and some links to that most recent study. Okay, let me go back to a point made earlier about our culture that tends to limit understanding of gender to only two options, man and woman. Again, we use the term transgender as an umbrella term to describe the following people. Cross-dressers, people who identify as genderqueer, third gender, gender fluid and or two-spirit, some intersex individuals, transsexuals, and all self-identified trans people. But as previously stated, even this is not the complete picture. So let's go over some definitions and take a look at handout number 2, if you have it. Biological sex. Yes, there's handouts. Where did Jay go?
Are they right there? Are they those?
There should be 5 in each set.
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to wait until everybody gets a copy of that so they can follow along.
Also, the study that Arlene referenced, Injustice at Every Turn, is available at our website in the library page at lgbtoverdadults.com. So it's listed there.
And I think Natalie included a link on the last minutes as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So on handout number 1, there's a link to the other study that I mentioned that was presented on January 28th of this year. You see the handouts coming around. We have 5, it should be 5.
This isn't it.
No, this isn't it.
Thank you.
Village.
Yeah, where's
Yeah,
Jay?
He's printing the election ballots right now.
Oh,
so,
okay.
when he comes back.
Yeah, I emailed them to him and he said he would have them, so.
Oops.
Okay, well, they'll be here to reinforce what I say, so just memorize everything I say to you. I have a PayPal account. Biological sex. Here's some definitions. Biological sex. The biological attributes such as anatomy, chromosomes, and hormones that inform whether a person is male, female, or intersex. Where sex refers to biology, gender refers to the cultural and social understandings that are layered on top of biology. Gender identity, an individual's internal sense of being a man, a woman, neither of these, both, and so on. It's one inner sense of being and one's own understanding of how one relates to the gender binary, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. Everyone has a gender identity. Gender expression. This is the way in which a person manifests masculinity, femininity, both or neither, through appearance, behavior, dress, speech patterns, preferences, and more. This term refers to how a person expresses their gender identity, or the cues people use to identify gender. Gender binary. Okay, I mentioned this a little bit earlier. This is a system of classifying sex and gender into 2 distinct and disconnected forms. Male, man, masculine, and female, woman, feminine, and assigning all bodies, identities, roles, and attributes to one side of the divide or the other. The gender binary is dependent on policing people to make sure they don't digress from the system in appearance, anatomy, or behavior. Sexual orientation. Sexual orientation describes to whom a person is sexually attracted and is often lumped together with attractional orientation, which describes to whom a person is romantically attracted. Gender identity refers only to a person's own self. Gender and sexual orientation are often lumped together, despite being different, because of societal expectations around sex, gender, and expression. Transgender individuals can have any sexual orientation. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, and straight. They're examples of sexual orientation. Everyone has a sexual orientation, yes.
I have a question. So for a policy, an inclusive policy in a workplace, we need gender expression, sexual orientation, gender identity, and what else would be?
I don't know that sexual orientation is important in a policy, because it's really not applying to. But gender identity would be. I'm a female. I'm legally a female. I have female parts. So my insurance policies, the companies were happy to change those. In fact, they changed them when I changed my name, even prior to my surgery.
Well, Optimal Care is doing that as well. I just wanted to make sure
Yeah.
that every group was represented.
Yes.
And,
yeah.
I mean, you're giving up a big fluid,
Right.
terms, and I just was wondering which ones needed,
Well,
which should be included.
Yeah, it's sad
Make
when
sure.
gender orientation becomes
be.
an issue
Yeah.
with insurance companies, and it does, and that's one of our biggest problems with insurance and healthcare.
Okay, so
Yeah.
gender expression, gender identity is pretty,
Well, gender identity particularly,
Okay.
because everybody doesn't express their gender always the same. Some people are fluid, some people are only part-time, so, yeah.
thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, let's talk about transgender. The term was first coined to distinguish gender benders with no desire for surgery or hormones from transsexuals, those who desire to legally and medically change their sex. More recently, transgender and or trans has become an umbrella term, popularly used to refer to all people who transgress dominant conceptions of gender, or at least all who identify themselves as doing so. The definition continues to evolve. Maybe you've heard the term cisgender recently. Cisgender or cis is a term that is becoming increasingly popular to describe people who are not trans or gender variant. In other words, those whose gender identities match, their gender identities and presentations match according to the gender binary, the sex they were assigned at birth. Cis is a prefix with roots that mean on the same side. Trans and cis are neutral descriptors, and they're analogous to hetero and homo. Cross-dressing and drag, there's a lot of misconceptions about that. Cross-dressing refers to occasionally wearing clothing of the opposite gender, and someone who considers this an integral part of their identity may identify as a cross-dresser. And just a note, the term cross-dresser is preferable to transvestite, and neither may be used to describe a transsexual person. Drag queens and drag kings are performers who often exaggerated performative presentations of gender and often cross-dress performatively. Cross-dressing and drag are not necessarily tied to erotic activity or sexual orientation. Genderqueer, third gender, gender fluid, two-spirit. These terms are used by people who identify as being between and or other than a man or a woman. They may feel they are neither, a little bit of both, or they may simply feel restricted by gender labels. Two-spirit is derived from some native North American cultures and can sometimes mean a mixture of masculine and feminine spirits in the same body. Interestingly enough, last night we had 3 Native American trans people, 2 female and 1 male, who all identified as two-spirit. And it was hard to keep the conversation because all of a sudden they wanted to talk about their culture, which was very interesting. And maybe that'll be a good presentation for our group anyway. Gender variant, gender nonconforming. These are general terms for people who bend gender in some way and or have non-binary gender identities. Intersex. Intersex is a general term used for a variety of genetic, hormonal, or anatomical conditions in which a person is born with reproductive or sexual anatomy that doesn't seem to fit the typical definitions of female and male. When a child is born intersex, many doctors and parents panic and rush to correct the problem via surgery. This often causes mental and physical difficulties later in life. I think within the last year there was a case where a couple had adopted a child that was intersex, and the child was maybe 8 months old. And the doctors, without any authorization, decided to perform surgery on that child. So I know there was a big lawsuit, but beside that fact, doctors are making decisions about children who are going to struggle with that. Some intersex individuals identify as transgender or gender variant. Others do not. And just a note, hermaphrodite is an obsolete term, and it's not considered currently appropriate. Transsexual. The term transsexual has historically been used to refer to individuals who have medically and legally changed their sex, or who wish to do so. Most transsexual people feel a conflict between their gender identity and the sex they were assigned at birth. Other labels within this group include MTF, male to female, or trans women, and FTM, female to male, or trans man. Transition. Transition refers to the complex process of authentically living into one's gender identity, often but not always including leaving behind one's assigned birth sex. A transition may include coming out to one's family, friends and or co-workers, changing one's name and or gender markers on legal documents, hormone therapy, and possibly, though not always, some form of surgery. Not all people who identify with the word transition, not all trans people identify with the word transition, and it should furthermore never be assumed that transition is a process to be completed. Some people who have transitioned no longer consider themselves to be transsexual or transgender, and rather identify as only a man or a woman, occasionally of transgender experience. Others identify as a trans woman or a trans man. I identify in, I call it the real world, the non-community, as a woman. When I'm working in the community, I identify as a trans woman, just so people can, identify me as part of their culture. Coming out versus disclosure. Coming out refers to openly stating one's identity, usually sexual orientation. Being out means being open about one's identity. Being outed means someone else has disclosed one's identity, usually without permission. Coming out is often a liberating experience for people who have previously hidden their identity. It can lead them to feel like they can be their authentic selves. However, trans people who have transitioned are not in the closet about their identity. So telling people that they are trans is a disclosure, and it's different than coming out. Trans people aren't fooling anyone or deceiving anyone about their identity by presenting themselves authentically as men or as women. Although not all transgender people have surgery for a variety of reasons, be it affordability, medical issues, or just their preference, it's important to discuss issues like identity, discrimination, and anti-trans violence, rather than having a preoccupation with gender reassignment surgery or transitioning. There's a preoccupation with transition and surgery which objectifies trans people, and then we don't get to deal with the real lived experience. The reality of trans people's lives is that so often we are targets of violence. We experience discrimination disproportionately with the rest of the community. And an example of that is the recent interviews by Piers Morgan and Katie Couric with Laverne Cox and Janet Mock, where she kept trying to steer the conversation to their prior life as males and changing their private parts. And I think it was handled very well by both ladies. Our unemployment rate is twice the national average. That's what we should be talking about. If you're a trans person of color, again, the rate is 4 times the national average. The homicide rate is highest among trans women. If we focus on transition in surgery, we don't actually get to talk about those things. So, having said that, and since it is often discussed among many cis people, and since it is a big part of our narrative, let me address the myths about transgender health care and gender confirmation surgery. In the medical community, one of the big no-nos is talking about medical care for transgender people. The reason is pretty simple. People have a visceral negative reaction to the idea of genital surgery. In many ways, the reaction to the idea of gender confirmation surgery resembles the reaction straight people have to the thought of 2 men or 2 women having sex. The problem is that the lack of understanding is the biggest impediment to actually receiving the care. I'd like to address the most common myths on that subject. So now we're up to handout number 3. Sexual functioning, self-esteem, body image, socioeconomic adjustment, family life, relationships, psychological status, and general life satisfaction are all negatively affected. This is supported by numerous studies, which also consistently show that access to GCS reduces suicidality by a factor of 3 to 6. That's between 67 and 84%. 80% of transgender people contemplate suicide, and 41% of transgender people attempt suicide. Lack of access to care is in fact likely to kill many transgender people. If this was a type of cancer that was killing 41% of the people who developed it, and it was possible to reduce the mortality rate by similar percentages, there wouldn't be any argument happening. It doesn't even have to be life or death to be medically necessary. A herniated disc won't kill you, but it will wreck the quality of your life. Similar, that is why every major medical, psychological, psychiatric, and therapist organization in the U.S. has issued statements supporting the medical necessity of GCS. The court system is increasingly acknowledging this, with 5 circuit courts having ruled that withholding transgender-specific health care from prisoners is a violation of the 8th Amendment because it is medically necessary. Myth number 2, these people need therapy, not surgery. They tried for decades to change people's gender identities the same way they tried to change the people's sexual orientation. Drugs, therapy, electroshock therapy, lobotomies, institutionalization. It doesn't work. It's why California and New Jersey have banned reparative therapy that tries to change sexual orientation or gender identity. And those bans are holding up in court because the overwhelming scientific consensus is that you can't change a person's gender identity and you can't make their dysphoria go away with drugs or talk therapy. If you could, that would be the preferred treatment rather than expensive surgery. Support for the necessity of GCS is based on scientifically based national medical research, professional medical specialty organizations, and widely and generally accepted medical and surgical practices and standards, and is supported by prevailing peer-reviewed medical literature. The opposition to the notion of necessity comes from religious zealots and people who aren't qualified to be making medical decisions anyway. Myth number 3, it's cosmetic. Again, every major medical, psychological, psychiatric, and therapist organization agrees GCS, or gender-confirming surgery, isn't cosmetic. AMA Resolution 122 states, an established body of medical research demonstrates the effectiveness and medical necessity of mental health care, hormone therapy, and sex reassignment surgery as forms of therapeutic treatment for many people diagnosed with gender identity disorder. Health experts in GID include WPATH, which is the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, have rejected that such treatments are cosmetic or experimental and have recognized that these treatments can provide safe and effective treatment for a serious health condition. Indeed, GCS improves functionality in socioeconomic status, family life, sexuality, and mental health. The irony surrounding the first 3 myths on this list is that they are generally perpetuated by people who would be outraged if bureaucrats were making medical decisions for them instead of their doctors. These same people, however, are perfectly fine with the public making healthcare decisions for transgender people instead of actual doctors, psychologists, and psychiatrists. Myth number 4, transgender people are just wimps because we can't handle the mental strain. Let me tell you, existing halfway between genders is stressful. Imagine for a moment if you woke up one morning with the wrong factory equipment. Most people can't. But Chloe Sevigny, and I'm not sure how you pronounce that name, but that's my guess. She played a transgender assassin on Hit and Miss. I don't know if anybody's ever seen that. She found wearing a prosthetic penis unbearable. I cried every day when they put it on, she said in an interview. This for a prosthetic that she knows isn't real and comes off when the day is over. When lesbian journalist Nora Vincent tried to live as a man as a social experiment, it took less than a year before the strain caused her to have herself voluntarily committed. When straight, healthy people try to pull off what transgender people do on a daily basis, that's live in the wrong gender, the strain is enough to make them suicidal too. Myth number 5. It's not like being born with one arm. Actually, it's very similar neurologically. There's significant evidence that transgender people are hardwired, with their brains expecting one set of physical characteristics but physically having another. Similar phenomena is seen with people with phantom limb sensations. This is potentially the reason why GCS has been successful where other treatments have failed. It is far easier to align the body with the mind than the other way around when body image is so deeply hardwired. Myth number 6. Suicidality has nothing to do with your physical body. If something was physically wrong with your genitals, how desperate would you be to have it fixed? How would you feel if you couldn't? Think you'd be depressed because you potentially face a lifetime of solitude and celibacy? Of feeling like a freak every time you looked in a mirror, went to the bathroom, took a shower, etc. It's very difficult for transgender people to have romantic relationships because most cis or non-transgender people's sexuality isn't made to handle mismatched primary and secondary sexual characteristics. The incongruence between the brain's internal body map and the physical body is also very distressing, as previously noted. Myth number 7, treat the depression, not the dysphoria. This is similar to the idea that the best way to treat chronic back pain is with Vicodin, rather than a surgery that will solve the underlying problem. Myth number 8, the Affordable Care Act pays for this. Sadly, it doesn't. Most of the state exchanges have exclusions of transgender coverage. Sadly, excuse me, my belt just came undone here. I have to stop breathing. Sadly, we are still at a point where we have to justify that trans-specific health care is medically necessary. And insurance companies still resist covering treatments that are recognized by specialists to be vital and medically necessary for some individuals, arguing that these procedures are purely cosmetic, such as facial feminization surgery, gender-confirming surgery, and electrolysis for transgender women. From my perspective, these procedures could be life-saving for some transgender women who are extremely at high risk for interpersonal violence. Myth number 9, I don't want to pay for that. Study after study shows including medical benefits for transgender people cost close to nothing, if not actually nothing. The Transgender Law Center put it in perspective when they noted that if a health care plan cost you $4,000 in a year, then adding transgender coverage would add 17 cents a year to that policy. The low dollar amount is because it's a one-time cost and it's very rare. For comparison's sake, the company including same-sex partner benefits would add $40 per year to that $4,000 policy, which is still, a drop in the bucket. Myth number 10 is mutilation of healthy tissue. Given scientific findings, GCS is much more accurately described as reconstructive surgery. The overwhelming body of evidence showing improved quality of life, including sexual function, for people who have had GCS also supports reconstructive surgery as accurate. Myth number 11, I'm actually a feline trapped in a human's body. Can I get surgery to have a cat? Also known as the I think I'm funny but I'm not answer, usually used by guys who watch South Park. When people use this argument, they assume that transgender people are mentally ill. We're not. Assume it's a delusion that can be cured. Wrong. And ignores one key fact. People can naturally be hardwired to identify as male or female. Sometimes the wiring and the equipment don't sync up during development. We have 40+ years of neuroscience research basically telling us gender identity and body image are written early on in development, and sometimes they don't match. People, however, do not naturally identify as a cat or any other non-human animal. Maybe a parrot, I don't know. Myth number 12. I don't like the term gender-confirming surgery. The other two most common terms used are sexual reassignment surgery, SRS, and gender reassignment surgery, SRS, or GRS. However, given the growing evidence that gender dysphoria stems from an incongruence between the brain's internal body map and the physical body, gender confirmation is probably the most technically accurate of the three. And that's a term that more and more surgeons are using. I think my surgeon, Dr. Christine McGinn, was the first one that kind of used it. So, Myth number 13. Ooh, ick. That was also used by a lot of the guys that I worked for when I told them what I was going to do. It's been said before, but it bears saying again. If you don't like gay sex, don't have gay sex. If you don't like gay marriage, don't get married to someone of the same sex. If you don't like abortion, don't have an abortion. And if you don't like the idea of GCS, then don't have GCS. Simple, you would think. Myth number 14. They should pay for it themselves. Perhaps nothing encapsulates privilege quite like this one. Who has $25,000 lying around? A corporate short-term disability policy, a supportive supervisor, and or the means to fight an 18-month-long battle with an insurance company. If you are not one of the few lucky transgender people who work at a big company with very pro-LGBT policies, these are the hurdles you have to face. Simultaneously, transgender people face massive discrimination in the workplace. Again, we suffer twice the national average unemployment rate, and we live in extreme poverty, 4 times more often than the general public, despite being twice as likely to hold advanced degrees. For most transgender people, this isn't even an option. Myth number 15, it doesn't change your DNA. This is irrelevant. There are lots of intersex people whose identities vary from their chromosomes. The relevant part of the discussion is whether GCS is medically necessary, and it is in the opinion of everyone who matters, and if it significantly improves quality of life, which it does. Myth number 16. Gay people should distance themselves from people like this before they lose some of the progress and acceptance they've received over the last 20 years. Just like lesbians distancing themselves from gay men in the 1980s because of the stigma of HIV/AIDS would have been expedient and every bit as unconscionable. Okay. Let's talk about 10 ways to be more welcoming and inclusive of transgender people, and take a look at handout number 4. Number 1, avoid making assumptions about gender identity or sexual orientation. Number 2, respect a person's identity and self-label, and respect a person's chosen name and pronoun preference. Practice offering your own preferred pronouns when you meet new people. Number 3, do not assume a trans person is all-knowing or wants to speak about trans issues. Do not assume a trans person can speak only about their trans identity, nor that it is an issue or not. Learn more about transgender identity on your own. Excuse me. Number 4, recognize that transgender is not a sexual orientation, and educate yourself and others on the difference between sexual orientation and gender identity expression. Don't say lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer if you're only talking about sexuality. Recognize that a person can identify with more than one of these labels. Number 5, use terms that encompass all genders rather than only 2. Example, children instead of boys and girls, people instead of women and men, siblings, kindred, or brothers and sisters and siblings of all genders instead of brothers and sisters. Number 6, review member policies for gender-exclusive groups sponsored by organizations. Do they make room to include transgender people? Would people with non-binary identities have a way to be involved? If your organization ever uses forms that ask for gender, think about whether the information is necessary. If it is, include a transgender option as well as a box for other. Also ask for gender rather than sex. Allow people to check more than one box. Number 7, talk to children about gender and transgender issues. Provide age-appropriate education around understanding one's gender identity and how gender norms and stereotypes play out in our society. I think PFLAG has a little booklet aimed at children. You don't have to look that up. Number 8, encourage facilities to create single-stall, ADA accessible bathrooms and label them in a welcoming way. Example is gender neutral or all gender. Make sure the signs elsewhere communicate that these bathrooms are available and point the way. Number 9, Do continuing education for your organization, specifically on transgender issues. You might consider a film showing and discussion or a panel discussion on the topic. And number 10, learn about local and federal laws and how to change them if they're not inclusive. Example, non-discrimination policies around employment, housing, credit, and public accommodations. Follow the leadership of local and/or federal transgender organizations. And finally, allies are an important component of any group, and they add numbers, they add voices, and in some cases they bring a certain amount of power that is lacking because of the way that a particular group is seen in the mainstream, where the group is trying to gain at least equality, if not acceptance. That last contribution is unfortunate, but true. Without allies, many groups would not be able to move forward as rapidly and as successfully as they do without outside support. Allies are an important component of any movement. So take a look at handout number 5. Here's 5 attributes of trans allies. Yeah, almost done.
Good.
Number 1, a trans ally acknowledges their own power and privileges and is aware of it, but also acknowledges ours. In other words, a trans ally understands that we are not victims and don't need rescuing, but also understands that the support of allies is beneficial to our community. Trans allies prefer to help us develop and utilize our own personal power in situations where they have it and we don't, rather than take over and wield their own power while we are silenced. I've done many choral presentations with non-trans allies, who are all fantastic, by the way.
Thank you.
And a couple of times I felt almost used as a poster child and make a point about the injustices to which trans people are subjected. While I appreciate the recognition that those injustices, and while I appreciate that non-trans people are just learning about the topic and they might be more open to receiving that information from a non-trans person, I also feel that this drains my own personal power and removes my voice from the conversation, and I do have a voice. Of course, not all trans people have the same level of personal power. And for each of us, the amount of power we have depends on the situation at hand. But when we do have it, we need to be able to use it. Number 2, a trans ally speaks up for us, but doesn't speak for us. No matter how many trans people an ally knows, and no matter how long he or she has been involved in the community, an ally understands that trans people need to speak for themselves, and that we're the best ones to describe our own experiences. A friend of mine commented at the beginning of his transition that he was on an LGBT advisory board to an organization. And when they were doing some LGBT advising, someone asked what transgender actually was. Being the only trans member of the group, he should have been the one to speak up. But the leader of the group, a non-trans man, answered the question, and he got some of the information wrong. So my friend learned a lesson. He knows that he needs to find his voice, and if an ally is truly an ally, they'd rather give us that power. But regardless, we definitely need other voices. People who have our backs and people who will speak for us, particularly when we aren't present. Number 3, a trans ally utilizes books, websites, films, conferences, and other resources to learn about the trans community. In addition to asking questions of trans people, the trans community should not be an effort for an ally. An ally is truly interested in learning the information. I've had prospective allies say to me, I don't know anything about it. What can you tell me? And in an educational setting, that's all well and good, but if I'm at a party or hanging out or having dinner, I'd rather not start at the beginning. I would hope that allies would do a little bit of self-educating and then ask me to fill in the blanks. And I've had so many times that I've had to repeat my story over and over again. And I'd like to talk about myself, believe me. A trans ally, number 4, a trans ally works for inclusion, not just diversity. In other words, adding a T to your organization name or displaying photos of trans people on your website might reflect diversity, but it does not reflect inclusion. Diversity involves diverse populations being visible and represented in your organization. Inclusion involves all those diverse populations working on behalf of your organization, including in positions of leadership, power, and influence. You can't have inclusion without diversity, but you can definitely have diversity without inclusion. Both are necessary. An example of that is Diversity would be, I'm throwing a party and everyone's invited. Inclusion would be, let's throw a party. And finally, number 5, a trans ally works to forward trans equality even when trans people aren't around. Trans rights and trans equality are part of an ally's life, and that concern exists even when no trans people are present, and even when no trans people are aware of what an ally is doing. Being an ally is something that you should live, not something that you should turn on and off, depending on the situation. So there's plenty more characteristics of trans allies. These are just a few. At any rate, thank you so much for the opportunity to address you all. Actually, I learn something every time I do this because our community is so diverse. So,
We have a few minutes, maybe for a
Yeah,
couple of questions.
I've got a question.
yes, for sure.
I work for Optimal Care, we're a
Right.
home care.
Mhm.
And I would like to know, not in the big picture, but for you, if you needed home care and you were in your home, and I brought my nurse Tipper here, and you had a surgery or a hip, something, whatever,
Right.
what are 3 top things that you would know that you were safe, that you were respected, like, whether it be terminology or where it would be how somebody approached you, or matter of fact, or
Yeah.
like for you personally, if you were my patient.
I don't know that my story is typical because personally, I was in the hospital this past year, all of July and part of August. And, I pretty much identified myself to everybody, and I actually had a posse. I had nurses with me all the time, and it was a chance for me to educate them. And I made so many friends. So I've had a wonderful experience. Not everybody does.
Well, and I'm not interested in you educating, but
Yeah.
being the patient.
I-
How is it we can provide treatment without you having to be the poster child, without you having
Right, I
to
understand.
do the whole, I mean, most patients want to talk about themselves, I'll say that, right? But they all have stuff to say. But I mean, without you being the poster child, with you just knowing, hey, wow, this is a great experience, I'm not feeling vulnerable, I'm not feeling afraid.
Right. I think knowing that, the service provider did some education and
Okay.
learned and understood our community, at least to a degree.
So the
Yeah.
education, and like you said again.
And then allow the patient to, offer information based on how comfortable they are.
Okay.
One idea that's come up in healthcare trainings that I've been a part of is simply issuing a little lapel pin, like a little
Yeah.
rainbow flag.
Yeah.
It's very tiny, and only people who are knowledgeable about
Right.
that community are going to notice it and understand its meaning.
Okay.
And it's something you can do if you don't have an office. If you're
Uh-huh.
a traveling worker and it's
Right.
just something small.
Something would be part of your
I don't
badge
know
or-
if that would
No, I think
at
it
least
actually
be an
would.
inroad, like, at least I know this person is
Right.
LGBT friendly,
Yeah.
even if they're not as conscious about T issues.
Yeah, I think most LGBT
Okay.
people are knowledgeable and friendly. And I think our community would feel comfortable.
Okay.
Arlene, you mentioned, of course, and it's wonderful that you have the support of your family.
Right.
You do have an extended family. Many transgender people might not have those kinds of supports. And more likely if they needed long-term care to have to go into a facility where they would be relying upon staff to understand what it means to be transgender and for them to be comfortable with that.
I think a good way to facilitate that would be to approach organizations that have a transgender population and perhaps get some kind of group that would go out on a weekly basis and visit these people because they don't have anybody else. And to have people that understand them and have lived those experiences, I think it would really be an amazing experience both for those that are in the facility and those that are doing it.
I just have one other comment. We were in our coalition marketing meeting last week and had the opportunity to give a good job reference to my one student who transitioned in one of my semesters. So I'm hoping to hear from him. But I played the message to these two about how it sounded really matter of fact. And I was very excited that the pronoun was right and that it was just like, hey, we want to I want to know how, you know, what you think about him, this, and this. So I'm hoping he gets the job, but I was very pleased with that, because I know it's such a struggle, and you were talking about the unemployment and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's something we hear about every Tuesday at group. People lost their job, they can't find a job. So it's very difficult, and I know a lot of them, you know, we always suggest they call Jay or the EEOC, and you know, I don't know that a lot of people do, so I try and stress that to them, because if they don't speak up, then there's no way to investigate those options.
For the rest of the meeting.
Sure.
And we, you know, we've talked about how some of the policies we have in Michigan make it very, for instance, Michigan's Medicaid policy prohibits payment for medications related to gender identity conditions. So even if the doctor has said hormone therapy is medically necessary, the state program won't cover it. We make it very difficult for transgender people to be able to get proper gender markers on their driver's license and state ID. We require surgery, even though the majority of transgender people don't have surgery, many times because they can't afford it, their insurance won't cover it, or it can be medically dangerous for them to have to undergo that. And our civil rights laws don't cover gender identity. So in general, it's illegal to be fired from a job for being transgender or being denied job opportunities. So there's a lot of policy considerations. And then when you bring it to the senior population, you know, the senior population, the older adult population, when you're relying on care providers who might not have the information or the understanding of what it means to be transgender,
Plus
host of problems.
that feeling of vulnerability that comes from
Sure.
just the aging process,
Right.
and when you layer that on.
Yeah, imagine
Exacerbating.
if you've transitioned and then feeling in a nursing home, you can no longer express yourself in accordance with your gender identity or gender expression. After all you've gone through and not to be able to do that.
Well, thank you very much
Thanks,
for
Arlene.
joining us today.
What can we do though? You know, one of the things we mentioned, we want to get the transgender community involved with our coalition. I don't know if it's even the time that we need or the place that we, what can we do to do a better job too? Because we'd like, rather than us talking about the issue, we'd like to have more of the community.
I would love to have someone come and speak to our group. And I think it's important because particularly our Tuesday group, a lot of us are older, a lot of us transition later in life. So we're facing those challenges, and you know, they're right around the corner for a lot of us.